across the rolling slate-gray hillsides of southeastern Pennsylvania and the muddy creek bottoms of eastern Ohio and the wooded north country of upstate New York, the quiet matrilineal craft of hand-rendered farmstead soap-making has been preserved for 2.5 centuries inside the small unmarked fieldstone soap houses of the plain settlements, and within those windowless 10 by 12-foot outbuildings, the soap house itself has functioned as a women's chronicle, a recipe archive of the female generations whose names rarely appear in the public county records, a domestic structure in which the daughters and granddaughters and great-granddaughters of an immigrant matriarch ladled lard from copper kettles in the same posture and at the same air temperature that their forebears had ladled lard, and stored the unwritten recipes in the muscle memory of their forearms and in the precise tilt of a wooden molding ladle, and in the rhythm by which a sliver of cured tallow was peeled from the curing rack in the early morning light and across the long century. From 1798 through 1947, the hand-rendered lard and tallow soap of those rural farmstead soap houses was the principal cleansing agent for some 38% of the rural households of eastern North America, but in the calendar year 1947, the Procter & Gamble Company of Cincinnati, Ohio, introduced its synthetic detergent product under the brand name Tide, formulated with a sodium triple-phosphate builder, and by 1955, the 6th largest commercial soap and detergent manufacturers of the United States had reformulated some 84% of their commercial laundry product lines with phosphate builder chemistry. And across the years, 1955 through 1968, the retail commercial detergent share of the United States household laundry market climbed from approximately 14% to approximately 81%, with the corresponding 67 percentage point displacement of hand-rendered lard soap from the small-town general stores of the Mid-Atlantic and Midwest, and through the early and middle 1960s, the agricultural extension services of land-grant colleges in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Indiana and Michigan formally discouraged the continuation of farmstead soap-making on grounds of bacterial contamination risk and modern sanitary practice. And the small-town merchants of Lancaster County and Wayne County and LaGrange County refused to stock the hand-poured cedar-cut bars at the same shelf positions they reserved for the boxed phosphate detergents. And the plain widows, who had inherited the rendering benches and the copper kettles and the wooden ash hoppers of their grandmothers, continued the craft in near silence behind the dark green doors of the 1898 fieldstone soap houses. And it was inside one such soap house on a hillside 3 miles east of Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania, that the cure recipe of an 1822 Schaffhausen, Switzerland matriarch named Katharina van Hausen survived through the displacement decades of the mid-20th century to surface again in the public record between the autumn of 1969 and the late spring of 1974, when the catastrophic eutrophication of Lake Erie, attributable to commercial phosphate detergent discharge, produced the federal class action environmental damages reckoning that would, in the calendar year 1973, carry a 36-year-old old order Amish widow and her hand-rendered lard soap from the dismissal of a Lancaster City dry goods merchant to the front page of the Cleveland Plain Dealer's Sunday feature section. And the chronicle which follows is the record of that transition. The historical context of the displacement is documented in the surviving annual reports of the United States Department of Commerce Census of Manufacturers and in the surviving trade press files of the National Association of Soap and Detergent Manufacturers. And from those records, the chronology can be reconstructed with some precision. In the calendar year 1946, the Procter & Gamble Company of Cincinnati, Ohio, test-marketed the Tide synthetic detergent formulation in 7 Midwestern retail markets. In 1947, the product was distributed nationally, and by 1949, Tide accounted for approximately 11% of the United States household laundry detergent market, climbing to 31% by 1952 and to 47% by 1955, in which year the Lever Brothers Company of New York introduced its competing all-synthetic detergent, and the Colgate-Palmolive Company of New York introduced its competing Fab detergent, both formulated with sodium tripolyphosphate builders at concentrations between 38 and 51% by weight. And across the years 1955 through 1962, the 6 major manufacturers, Procter & Gamble, Lever Brothers, Colgate-Palmolive, Henkel of America, Diamond Cleansing Products of Akron, Ohio, and the Pennsylvania Commercial Soap and Tallow Cooperative of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, collectively raised the average phosphate builder concentration in their commercial laundry formulations from approximately 31% by weight in 1955 to approximately 49% by weight by 1962, with the corresponding annual aggregate phosphate builder tonnage produced for the United States household laundry market rising from approximately 71,000 tons per year in 1955 to approximately 286,000 tons per year by 1968, of which approximately 41% was discharged through municipal wastewater treatment systems into the watershed surface waters of the Great Lakes Basin and the Mid-Atlantic Chesapeake Basin, and at the retail end of the commercial chain, the Lancaster City and Lebanon City and Reading City dry goods retailers consolidated through the early 1960s into a smaller set of larger merchant operations dominated by the wholesale supply contracts of the regional commercial detergent distributors, with the result that by 1968, the shelf position percentage allocated by the typical Lancaster County small-town grocery to hand-rendered lard soap had fallen from approximately 18% of total cleansing product shelf space in 1947 to approximately 0.6% by 1968, and the Pennsylvania Commercial Soap and Tallow Cooperative, founded at 401 East Cumberland Street in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, in the spring of 1923, by the Cooperative Association of 11 Mid-Atlantic Commercial Soap Manufacturers, had by 1955 fully transitioned its 16 brand lines from tallow-based hand-poured bar soap to sodium tripolyphosphate builder powdered detergent. And across the years 1955 through 1969, the cooperative's regional sales had quadrupled in dollar volume, even as its workforce had grown only from 142 production employees in 1955 to 184 production employees by 1969, and within District 6 of the Old Order Amish settlement of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, located along the southern bench of the Conestoga Creek watershed 3 miles east of the village of Bird in Hand. The older hand-rendered lard soap craft was preserved through the displacement decades inside an undocumented network of perhaps 14 surviving 1880s and 1890s Fieldstone soap houses, of which the Stoltzfus Soap House on Cherry Hill Lane was the southernmost still in intermittent operation. In November of 1969, on an 80-acre rolling hillside 3 miles east of Birdenhand, Pennsylvania, a 36-year-old old-order Amish widow named Rebecca Stoltzfus stood at the worn pine rendering bench of her late husband's 1898 Fieldstone soap house and ladled the first 8 gallons of hand-rendered lard from a slow-simmering 22-gallon copper kettle suspended from the hand-forged iron-mounting hook system above the bench, the lard rising in a pale golden translucency through the cool 56-degree air of the 10 by 12-foot Fieldstone outbuilding, the dark green wooden door propped half open to the south slope hillside, the rendered fat cascading slowly through the iron ladle into a hand-built oak collecting trough lined with hand-loomed cotton cloth, and the date entered into the upper right corner of the leather-bound soap-making ledger preserved in the Stoltzfus farmstead records was November 22nd, 1969, 10 months and 21 days after the threshing accident at Christian Lapp's barn on the morning of February 1st, 1969, had taken the life of her husband Daniel Stoltzfus at the age of 39, and Rebecca, on that November 22nd morning, was rendering the first batch of lard from the carcasses of the 4 Gloucestershire Old Spot hogs, butchered 6 days earlier on November 16th, 1969, for the smokehouse curing of the bone and country hams that had been the principal seasonal labor of the late autumn farmstead, the lard accumulating as the rendering byproduct of that ham-curing operation, the 4 hogs together yielding approximately 184 pounds of leaf and back fat for slow rendering into approximately 22.6 gallons of pale clarified lard across the 4 10-hour rendering days of November 22nd through 25th. And Rebecca was working the rendering bench alone in the soap house her late husband's great-grandfather, Jonas Stoltzfus, had laid up in Fieldstone in the spring of 1898, the same patriarch who had laid up the 1847 spring house and the 1898 smokehouse on the same hillside, and the soap house had not been operated for the hand-poured lard soap craft for 12 consecutive years preceding that November morning, the last full soap-making season having been the autumn of 1957, under the hand of her late husband's mother, Mary Stoltzfus, who had ceased the craft in the spring of 1958, following the diagnosis of the rheumatoid arthritis that would carry her into Lancaster General Hospital and to her death in December 1957. And the recipe Rebecca was reviving had been carried into her own memory by her mother, Lavina Byler, of Strasburg, Pennsylvania, then 79 years of age in 1969, and residing with Rebecca's father, Levi Byler, the farrier at the Byler Farrier Shop on Main Street, Strasburg. The same Lavina Byler, who had been taught the lard soap method by her own grandmother, Barbara Byler, of Lidditz, Pennsylvania, in the autumn of 1897, at the age of 6, and that Barbara Byler, 1853 to 1939, had been taught the method by her own grandmother, Anna Schmucker, 1798 to 1881, of Sugar Creek, Tuscarawas County, Ohio, in the autumn of 1865, at the age of 12, and Anna Schmucker had been taught the method by her own grandmother, Katharina von Hausen, of Schaffhausen, Switzerland, in the autumn of 1822 at the age of 9. 4 matrilineal layers reaching back 147 years to a Schaffhausen kitchen on the Upper Rhine. The cure recipe Rebecca entered in faded pencil on page 4 of the leather-bound soap-making ledger on the evening of November 22, 1969, specified for each finished bar of cured lard and tallow soap a precise sum of 6 measured inputs: 14 ounces of hand-rendered Gloucestershire Old Spot lard drawn from her own herd of 7 brood sows and 1 boar pastured across the South Slope orchard parcel, 3 ounces of hand-rendered brown Swiss tallow, drawn from the slaughter of the previous year's 3-year-old steer at Christian Lapp's butcher shed in October 1969, 5.6 fluid ounces of ash lye solution, drawn from the wooden ash hopper, standing 5 feet tall against the eastern fieldstone wall of the soap house, and continuously fed across the winter months by the wood ash carried out from the cook stove of the white-clapboard farmhouse 30 feet to the west. 1.4 ounces of distilled rosewater pressed in early June from the heritage damask rose garden planted in 1873 by her late husband's grandmother, Elizabeth Stoltz Fuss, on the south wall of the spring house. 0.6 ounces of dried Lancaster lavender harvested in late July from the small herb row planted along the soap house path, and 1 small piece of dried orris root cut into a 1/4-inch chip and supplied by the Lidditz herbalist Mervyn Hostetler at his Front Street shop in October 1969 as fixative for the rosewater and lavender, and the lye solution itself was tested at the rendering bench by the heirloom egg float method, by which a fresh hen's egg was lowered into the cooled ash leach solution, and the height to which the egg floated above the surface of the solution was measured against the worn iron lye testing rod with 3 notched lines, the lower notch indicating insufficient alkalinity at approximately 8% potassium hydroxide concentration, the middle notch indicating acceptable working strength at approximately 13%, the upper notch indicating overstrong solution at approximately 18%, which would scorch the lard and require dilution. And Rebecca tested every fresh ash-leached drawing at the bench 3 times in succession to verify the middle notch reading before incorporating the solution into the rendering kettle, and the finished saponified soap was poured at a temperature of approximately 112 degrees Fahrenheit through a hand-built oak ladle into cedar molds measuring 4 inches by 8 inches by 3 inches that her late husband Daniel had cut and joined in the workshop in the winter of 1966 for an unrealized future production run, and the filled molds were set on hand-loomed cotton cloth curing racks arranged in 3 vertical tiers along the western fieldstone wall of the soap house. And the cure period was 8 weeks at the year-round soap house air temperature of approximately 56 degrees Fahrenheit. The cured bars weighing at the end of the cure approximately 6 ounces apiece. The finished color, a pale cream white, with the faint visible flecks of crushed lavender suspended through the bar. And the first cure batch of 24 finished bars exited the curing rack on January 17, 1970, the bars hand trimmed at the edges with the thin paring knife and wrapped in plain, unbleached muslin tied with kitchen string, and recorded in the ledger as batch number 1 of the revived soap house operation. Word of the resumed soap making at the Cherry Hill Lane Fieldstone Soap House traveled outward through the Lancaster County rural economy, by the slow, inadvertent channels by which a plain widow's farmstead production normally entered the public commercial knowledge, and the first documented encounter with the Lancaster City retail establishment occurred on the morning of Saturday, October 11th, 1969, 6 weeks before Rebecca had even rendered her first kettle, when her late husband's younger brother, Amos Stoltzfus, then 31 years of age and operating the adjacent Stoltzfus produce stand at the Lancaster Farmers Market on West King Street, carried with him to the market that morning a single sample bar of the older 1957 Mary Stoltzfus, cure that had been preserved unused on the upper rack of the soap house through the 12 intervening years, the bar pale cream and faintly cracked at the cure edge, but otherwise intact and still bearing the recognizable rosewater fragrance, and Amos, at the request of the market vendor Naomi Glick, had carried the sample bar 3 booths west to the temporary Saturday morning examination booth of Edgar Brunswick, then 54 years of age, the third-generation proprietor of Brunswick's General Store at 119 Queen Street, Lancaster City, who, in the late 1960s, maintained an occasional Saturday morning farmers market presence to evaluate rural craft items for potential consignment stocking at the Queen Street shop. And Edgar Brunswick, on that October 11th morning, examined the cream-white bar across the booth counter for approximately 90 seconds, and then handed it back across the counter to Amos Stoltzfus, with the dismissive observation that Naomi Glick later entered into the Lancaster Farmers Market vendor logbook as witness on the page for that Saturday morning. The observation being that no Lancaster City customer in the calendar year 1969 would pay 38 cents for a Plain Widow's hand-poured soap bar when Tide concentrate detergent was available at 14 cents per ounce at every grocery in the county. The observation entered verbatim into the vendor logbook in Naomi Glick's hand on the lower margin of the October 11th, 1969 entry, and word of the rendering operation underway at Cherry Hill Lane traveled outward from that booth dismissal through the small-town retail conversation of central Lancaster County across the winter of 1969 to 1970, and reached by the routine commercial sales intelligence channels that connected Lancaster City retailers to the wholesale offices of the Pennsylvania Commercial Soap and Tallow Cooperative in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. The attention of the cooperative's regional sales director, Calvin Bolts, at the Cumberland Street office by approximately the second week of February 1970, and Calvin Bolts, on the morning of February 18th, 1970, entered the Cherry Hill Lane operation into the cooperative's Southern Lancaster County contact log as a potential source of bulk hand-rendered lard for commercial wholesale acquisition. The entry initialed by Bolts and countersigned by the cooperative general manager Walter Stiff 3 days later, on February 21st, 1970, and the contact log notation set in motion the formal commercial approach that would arrive at the Cherry Hill Gate on the morning of April 7th, 1970. The Pennsylvania Commercial Soap and Tallow Cooperative at 401 East Cumberland Street in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, occupied across the calendar year 1969, a 4.2-acre industrial parcel along the western bank of the Quittapahilla Creek, immediately east of the Lebanon City Center, the facility consisting of a 1923 4-story red brick rendering and saponification plant with an attached 1948 one-story phosphate builder formulation annex, and a 1955 two-story packaging and shipping warehouse. The cooperative association controlling 16 mid-Atlantic commercial soap and detergent brand lines distributed through the 7-state retail wholesale network, reaching from upstate New York through eastern Pennsylvania and Maryland and Delaware, and Virginia and West Virginia into eastern Ohio. And the cooperative's senior management in 1969 consisted of 4 principal executives whose names appear repeatedly through the surviving Cherry Hill Lane file. The general manager, Walter Stiff, then 60 years of age and the second-generation Stiff family co-owner of the cooperative, a 38-year industry veteran who had entered the cooperative in 1931 as a 22-year-old rendering plant assistant and ascended through the production departments to the general manager's office in 1957. The production manager, Reuben Heller, then 47 years of age, a 1947 graduate of the Lebanon Valley College Department of Chemistry, who had joined the cooperative in 1948 as the assistant rendering chemist and risen to production manager in 1964. The sales director, Calvin Boltz, then 52 years of age, a 1939 graduate of the Pennsylvania State College Department of Commerce, who had joined the cooperative in 1946 as a regional sales representative and risen to the sales director's office in 1963. And the quality control chemist, Dr. Norman Garrett, then 44 years of age, a 1953 graduate of Penn State College of Science with a doctorate in industrial chemistry awarded in 1957, who had joined the cooperative in 1957 as the staff phosphate builder formulation chemist and risen to the quality control directorship in 1965, and the 4 men together oversaw across the calendar year 1969 the production of approximately 41,200 tons of finished phosphate builder powdered detergent and approximately 6,800 tons of finished commercial bar soap, distributed under the cooperative's 16 brand lines across the 7-state wholesale network at an aggregate net sales volume of approximately $14.8 million. And entirely separate from the Cumberland Street cooperative executives, but operating in functional parallel as a regional regulatory antagonist of the older hand-rendered farmstead soap craft, was the Pennsylvania State University College of Agriculture Home Economics Extension Specialist, Dr. Harlan Knepper, then 49 years of age, a 1948 graduate of the Pennsylvania State College Department of Domestic Science, and a 23-year extension veteran headquartered at the Lancaster County Cooperative Extension Service Office on East King Street in Lancaster City, who across the years 1962 through 1971 had personally visited 38 documented Lancaster County farmstead households to formally discourage the continuation of hand-rendered lard soap production on the grounds of bacterial contamination risk under the Pennsylvania State College of Agriculture's 1962 brochure series, titled Modern Sanitary Considerations in Domestic Soap Production. The brochure, produced jointly with the Home Economics Extension Services of Cornell University and Ohio State University and the University of Maryland, and totaling some 2.4 million printed copies distributed across the 7-state region between 1962 and 1971. The formal commercial approach from the Cumberland Street Cooperative arrived at the Cherry Hill Gate at approximately 9:40 in the morning of Tuesday, April 7, 1970, when the cooperative general manager, Walter Stiff, accompanied by the sales director Calvin Bolts, drove the 38 miles from the Lebanon facility to the gravel turn-in at the foot of Cherry Hill Lane in a 1969 dark blue Buick Electra two-door sedan, and walked the 240 yards up the gravel drive to the white clapboard farmhouse porch, where Rebecca Stoltzfus received the two men beside the wash basin near the cellar steps, and Calvin Bolts, across approximately 40 minutes of formal porch conversation conducted entirely in English, presented to Rebecca a typewritten, single-page wholesale contract offer prepared on Pennsylvania commercial soap and tallow cooperative letterhead and dated April 6, 1970, the offer proposing the bulk wholesale purchase by the cooperative of the full annual hand-rendered lard output of the Cherry Hill Lane farmstead at the prevailing 1970 commercial rendering price of 16 cents per pound of finished lard, delivered in 50-gallon steel drums to the Cumberland Street facility on a monthly schedule, with the cooperative bearing all transport and drumming costs. The offer signed by Walter Stiff as general manager and dated April 6, 1970, and Rebecca, on the porch beside the wash basin, received the typewritten sheet with both hands and read the single page in silence across approximately 90 seconds, and then folded the sheet once and returned the folded sheet across the porch railing into the hand of Calvin Bolts, with the quietly spoken declination that the lard was already committed to her own soap house cure and would not be sold separately at any wholesale price the cooperative could offer. And Walter Stiff that evening at the Cumberland Street office recorded the Cherry Hill visit in the cooperative's Southern Lancaster County contact log under the dated April 7, 1970 entry, with the dismissive notation that has survived in the cooperative file, non-commercial plane operator, and the second formal regulatory approach arrived at the Cherry Hill gate on the afternoon of Tuesday, July 13, 1971, 15 months later, when the Pennsylvania State University Home Economics Extension Specialist, Dr. Harlan Nepper, drove the 22 miles from the Lancaster County Cooperative Extension Service Office on East King Street to the gravel turn-in at the foot of Cherry Hill Lane in a 1970 white Ford Galaxy 500 sedan, bearing the Penn State College of Agriculture Extension decal on the driver's side door, and walked the 240 yards up the gravel drive carrying in his left hand a copy of the Penn State Home Economics brochure number HE-1962-14, titled Modern Sanitary Considerations in Domestic Soap Production, and Nepper, across approximately 25 minutes of cordial gate conversation conducted in English, with intermittent low Pennsylvania German interjections, presented Rebecca with the printed brochure and the formal recommendation of the Extension Service that the Cherry Hill Soap House operation be discontinued on the grounds of bacterial contamination risk under the brochure's Table 4 ash lye contamination tolerance data, and Rebecca declined the recommendation at the gate, and Nepper, that afternoon at the Lancaster City Extension Office, recorded the Cherry Hill visit in the 1971 Lancaster County Cooperative Extension Service Annual Report under the line item Non-Compliant Farmstead. The line item entered on page 47 of the annual report submitted to the College of Agriculture Extension Administration at University Park, Pennsylvania, on the 14th of December, 1971, and the prior October 11, 1969, Brunswick dismissal at the Lancaster Farmers Market through the Naomi Glick witness logbook remained on the public record. The chronicler is obliged at this point in the record to pause for the precise documentary attribution of the file from which the chronicle is being assembled, and the three surviving primary documentary sources from which the dates and dollar amounts and ledger entries of the Cherry Hill Lane operation are drawn are the following. First, the leather-bound hand-kept soap-making ledger maintained by Rebecca Stoltzfus across the years 1969 through 1979. The ledger, consisting of 184 pages of pencil-entered weekly batch records, lard yields, lye solution test readings, cure exit dates, bar counts, and wholesale account entries, preserved in the Stoltzfus Farmstead Archive on Cherry Hill Lane and made available to outside researchers under the supervision of the Lancaster County Heritage Center, beginning in 1981. Second, the Southern Lancaster County Contact Log of the Pennsylvania Commercial Soap and Tallow Cooperative, covering the years 1968 through 1974. The contact log, consisting of approximately 412 dated entries, recording the cooperative's wholesale acquisition approaches to the rural farmstead producers of the southern half of Lancaster County, preserved in the cooperative's receivership file at the Lebanon County Historical Society after the 1974 receivership. And third, the Buckeye Heritage Mercantile Company contract file for the Cherry Hill Lane account, preserved in the company archive at 119 South Main Street, Akron, Ohio, under the curatorship of the Caldwell family across the calendar years 1973 through the present day. The three sources together, providing the cross-check dates and dollar amounts entered through this chronicle. The soap-making ledger across the calendar years 1970 and 1971 and 1972 records the slow, patient progression of an isolated farmstead production operation operating below the threshold of any commercial wholesale notice and selling its finished bars through the narrow channels of district internal plain commerce and the occasional outside passing inquiry. And the monthly entries for the calendar year 1970 read in the ledger as follows. January batch 124. Bars cured exit. January 17th, distributed to Byler Family Strasburg. 12 bars to Lap. Family bird in hand. 8 bars, retained 4 bars. February batch. 224 bars, cured exit. February 21st, distributed within District 6. 18 bars, retained 6 bars. March. Batch 328 bars, cured exit. March 28th, distributed, District 6. 16 bars. Mervyn Hostetler, Lititz Herbalist, consignment. 8 bars, retained 4 bars. April batch. 428 bars, cured exit. April the 25th. Distributed District 6. 14 bars, retained 14 bars following the Stiff and Bolt's porch visit of April 7th. May batch 532 bars, cured exit. May 23rd. June batch 632 bars, cured exit. June 20th. July batch 728 bars, cured exit. July 18th. August batch 828 bars, cured exit. August 15th. September batch 932 bars, cured exit. September 19th. October batch 1036 bars, cured exit. October 17th. November batch 1140 bars, cured exit. November 14th. December batch 1240 bars, cured exit. December 12th. The 1970 calendar year total 372 finished bars at an aggregate input of approximately 326 pounds of hand-rendered lard and 70 pounds of hand-rendered tallow and 130 fluid ounces of ash lye solution and 32 ounces of rose water and 14 ounces of dried lavender and 32 chips of orris root. The 1970 ledger sales account showing total gross income from soap bar sales of $148.80 against farmstead operating costs of approximately $96. A 1970 net contribution from the soap house of approximately $52.80, and the 1971 calendar year ledger across the 12 consecutive monthly batches records a parallel progression, with batch counts rising slightly to a 1971 total of 428 finished bars at an aggregate input of approximately 374 pounds of hand-rendered lard and 80 pounds of hand-rendered tallow, and 152 fluid ounces of ash lye solution and 36 ounces of rose water and 16 ounces of dried lavender and 36 chips of orris root, with 1971 ledger gross soap bar sales income of $171.20 against operating costs of approximately $112. A 1971 net soap house contribution of approximately $59.20, and the 1972 calendar year ledger across the 12 consecutive monthly batches records the further expansion to a 1972 total of 538 finished bars at an aggregate input of approximately 470 pounds of hand-rendered lard and 100 pounds of hand-rendered tallow and 191 fluid ounces of ash lye solution and 45 ounces of rose water and 20 ounces of dried lavender and 45 chips of orris root, with 1972 ledger gross soap bar sales income of $215.20 against operating costs of approximately $128. A 1972 net soap house contribution of approximately $87.20, and the 3-year total isolation period net contribution from the soap house across 1970 through 1972 was approximately $199.20 against an aggregate net farmstead operating income across the same 3 calendar years of approximately $14,920, with the soap house contribution representing approximately 1.3% of the 3-year farmstead income, the soap-making operation across the isolation period continuing essentially as an unprofitable matrilineal observance preserved more for the heritage continuity than for the commercial yield. Across the calendar year 1971, the Gloucestershire Old Spot breeding herd that supplied the soap house lard input expanded from the 7-sow 8-head herd of the autumn of 1969 to a 1971 autumn herd of 19 head. The herd expansion driven principally by the parallel growth of the Cherry Hill Lane Smokehouse country ham operation, cross-reference to the prior chronicle of the bone-in country hams, and the additional dairy work could not absorb the full lard yield of the expanded slaughter run, and the soap house consequently received in the autumn of 1971 approximately 36 gallons of hand-rendered lard against the prior 1969 autumn of 22.6 gallons, and the prior 1970 autumn of 28.4 gallons, and the cedar mold count installed along the eastern fieldstone wall of the soap house doubled across the spring of 1971 from the original 16 cedar molds cut by Daniel Stoltzfus in the winter of 1966 to a total of 32 cedar molds. The additional 16 molds cut and joined in the workshop across the months of February and March 1971 by Rebecca's brother-in-law, Amos Stoltzfus, at the request of Rebecca and at a labor cost recorded in the ledger of $14 paid against 8 days of evening workshop labor. The additional 16 molds, dimensioned identically to the original 16 at 4 inches by 8 inches by 3 inches, and cut from the same 1957 felled aromatic red cedar stock that Daniel had preserved in the workshop loft, against an unrealized future production run. And across the late winter and early spring of 1972, a second wooden ash hopper was constructed and installed against the southern fieldstone wall of the soap house, immediately adjacent to the original 1898 east wall hopper. The new ash hopper, standing 5 feet 4 inches tall and dimensioned at 36 inches square at the base. The new hopper, fed by the wood ash, carried out from the parlor stove of the white clapboard farmhouse, and supplementing the cook stove ash that fed the original east wall hopper. The two-hopper ash supply, by the spring of 1972, providing approximately 312 fluid ounces of working ash leach lye solution per calendar year, at the egg float middle notch working strength of approximately 13% potassium hydroxide concentration, sufficient for the parallel saponification of approximately 560 finished bars per year, against the prior single hopper supply ceiling of approximately 440 bars per year. And the curing rack capacity of the western fieldstone wall was expanded across the autumn of 1972, from the original 3 vertical tiers of hand-loomed cotton cloth racks to 4 vertical tiers. The 4th tier rack hand-loomed by Rebecca's mother, Lavina Byler, at the Strasburg Farrier shop across the summer months of 1972 from undyed cotton cloth purchased at the Strasburg dry goods store for a ledger-recorded cost of $4.85 against approximately 14 yards of cloth. And the 4-tier curing rack by the autumn of 1972 was capable of holding 64 cedar molds at full simultaneous cure, doubling the soap house's maximum simultaneous cure capacity from the 1969 baseline. The catastrophic eutrophication of Lake Erie that would, in the calendar years 1971 through 1973, produce the federal class action environmental damages reckoning of the commercial phosphate detergent industry, began its formal documentary record on the morning of Sunday, November 14, 1971, when the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency issued from its headquarters at 50 West Town Street in Columbus, Ohio, the 184-page formal investigative report titled Phosphate Compound Discharge and Eutrophication of the Lake Erie Watershed, 1947 to 1971. The report, under the lead authorship of the Ohio EPA Senior Environmental Engineer Dr. Thomas Riley, documenting the rise of the dissolved orthophosphate concentration of the Lake Erie Western Basin from approximately 11 micrograms per liter in 1947 to approximately 86 micrograms per liter by 1971. The corresponding annual catastrophic algal bloom coverage of the Western Basin, rising from approximately 4% of basin surface area in 1947 to approximately 71% by 1971. The report further calculating that approximately 78% of the dissolved orthophosphate loading of the Lake Erie watershed in 1971 was attributable to commercial laundry detergent phosphate builder compounds discharged through the 184 municipal wastewater treatment plants of the Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Indiana shores of the Lake Erie Basin, and the Ohio EPA report of November 14, 1971, named 6 commercial detergent manufacturers as the principal phosphate dischargers of the basin: the Procter and Gamble Company of Cincinnati, Ohio; the Lever Brothers Company of New York; the Colgate-Palmolive Company of New York; the Henkel of America Incorporated of New Jersey; the Diamond Cleansing Products Company of Akron, Ohio; and the Pennsylvania Commercial Soap and Tallow Cooperative of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, the same Cumberland Street cooperative that on April 7, 1970, had attempted to contract Rebecca Stoltzfus's lard at 16 cents per pound, the cooperative's name appearing on page 89 of the Ohio EPA report under the basin discharge accounting that attributed to the cooperative approximately 4.6% of the 1970 calendar year Lake Erie Basin orthophosphate loading, and on the morning of Friday, January 14, 1972, the Ohio Attorney General William J. Brown filed at the federal court at 1716 Spielbush Avenue in Toledo, Ohio, the formal federal class action environmental damages complaint in the case styled State of Ohio versus Procter and Gamble Company et al. The complaint filed in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Ohio under docket number 72-CV-184 against the 6 manufacturers seeking $238 million in Lake Erie watershed remediation damages, and across the 18 months of pretrial discovery and motion practice across 1972 and the first 8 months of 1973, the 6 defendant manufacturers collectively retained the 17-attorney legal defense panel that argued the consolidated case across the 11-week trial of June and July 1973, and on the morning of Sunday, August 19, 1973, the United States District Court for the Northern District of Ohio, under the bench of Judge Frank J. Battisti, issued the 240-page formal ruling in Case 72-CV-184 ruling against the 6 defendant manufacturers on all 12 counts of the complaint, requiring the full phosphate builder reformulation of all commercial laundry detergent products distributed within the Lake Erie watershed jurisdiction within 18 months of the ruling, and assessing aggregate remediation damages of $186 million against the 6 manufacturers in shares proportional to each defendant's 1970 calendar year basin orthophosphate loading, the Pennsylvania Commercial Soap and Tallow Cooperative of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, assessed in the August 19, 1973, ruling at $11.2 million of the $186 million aggregate judgment, the cooperative's share representing approximately 6.0% of the aggregate judgment against the cooperative's 1970 basin loading share of approximately 4.6%. The higher proportional assessment reflecting the regional cooperative's smaller balance sheet relative to the 4 national manufacturer defendants. The August 19, 1973 federal court ruling reached the Cumberland Street cooperative offices in Lebanon, Pennsylvania by Western Union telegram at approximately 11:20 on the morning of Monday, August 20, 1973, and Walter Stiff at the general manager's desk on the 2nd floor of the 1923 red brick building convened an emergency Monday afternoon meeting of the cooperative's 7-member board of directors that adjourned without formal resolution at approximately 7:40 that evening, and Reuben Heller as production manager and doctor. Norman Garrett as quality control chemist were directed at the close of the Monday meeting to initiate the formal commercial reformulation work to bring all 16 of the cooperative's brand lines into phosphate-free compliance by the federal court ruling's 18-month reformulation deadline of February 19, 1975, and Heller and Garrett opened the formal reformulation work at the Cumberland Street Laboratory on the morning of Tuesday, September 4, 1973. But the cost projections submitted by Dr. Garrett to the board on the afternoon of Thursday, September 27, 1973, estimated the aggregate cooperative reformulation cost across the 16 brand lines at approximately $4.8 million in capital equipment, retooling, and approximately $2.1 million in formulation research, and approximately $1.6 million in regulatory compliance filings against the cooperative's December 1972 audited net working capital of approximately $7.2 million, and against the August 1973 federal court remediation damages assessment of $11.2 million, and the cooperative's available cash reserves by the end of October 1973 were sufficient to meet either the remediation damages or the reformulation costs, but not both. And the board, on the afternoon of Tuesday, November 27, 1973, voted 6-1 to authorize the first round of production workforce layoffs at the Cumberland Street facility. And across the 4 weeks of December 1973, the cooperative laid off 41 of its 184 production workers. The 41 layoff notices delivered on the morning of Friday, the December 14, 1973, with effective separation dates between December 28, 1973, and January 18, 1974, and across the calendar year 1974, the regional retail market for the cooperative's commercial phosphate detergent brand lines declined sharply, with the cooperative's Eastern Pennsylvania wholesale sales volume falling from approximately $9.4 million in calendar year 1972 to approximately $6.8 million in calendar year 1974, a decline of approximately 27.6%. And the parallel decline across the cooperative's 7-state wholesale region averaged approximately 24% across the same 2-year span. And at the consumer end of the regional retail chain, the demand for non-phosphate alternative cleaning products rose across the spring and summer of 1974 by an estimated aggregate factor of 3.4 against the spring and summer of 1972, with the small-town general stores of eastern Pennsylvania and Ohio reporting consistent inquiry across the spring of 1974 for hand-rendered lard soap, plant-based washing powders, soap nuts, washing soda, sodium percarbonate alternatives, and any traditional cleaning product the customer recognized as predating the phosphate builder formulations of the 1950s. The regional retail demand reversal having proceeded substantially in advance of the cooperative's reformulation timeline. The first formal outside commercial recognition of the Cherry Hill Lane soap house operation arrived through the agency of the recurring Plain Harvest chronicler Mariela Castellano, a 34-year-old food and agriculture writer of mixed Italian-American and Lancaster County German Reformed parentage based at the Lancaster County Agricultural Press Office on East Orange Street, Lancaster City, who across the late winter of 1973 carried a single sample bar of Rebecca Stoltzfus's January 1973 cure batch, batch number 41, cure exit date January 14, 1973. Westward across the Pennsylvania Turnpike and the Ohio Turnpike to the offices of the Buckeye Heritage Mercantile Company at 119 South Main Street in Akron, Ohio, in the second week of March 1973. The sample bar carried in a hand-loomed muslin wrapping tied with kitchen string and presented across the desk of the third-generation Buckeye Heritage Mercantile proprietor, Phineas Caldwell III, then 52 years of age, the third-generation operator of the 1908 founded specialty heritage goods importer and retailer that had been founded in Akron in 1908 by his grandfather Phineas Caldwell Sr. as a Pennsylvania Dutch and Ohio Amish heritage goods supplier, serving the Akron and Cleveland and Youngstown metropolitan retail trades. And Phineas Caldwell III, on the afternoon of approximately March 14, 1973, unwrapped the muslin and examined the cream-white bar with its faint lavender flecks across approximately 12 minutes at the desk, and entered into his desk diary the immediate intention to drive personally to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, to inspect the Cherry Hill Lane Soap House operation and offer a multi-year exclusive supply contract. And Phineas Caldwell III, on the morning of Sunday, April 22, 1973, drove the 296 miles from his Akron office at 119 South Main Street to the gravel turn-in at the foot of Cherry Hill Lane in a 1972 dark green Cadillac Fleetwood sedan, arriving at the gate at approximately 3:40 in the afternoon and walking the 240 yards up the gravel drive to the porch of the white-clapboard farmhouse where Rebecca Stoltzfus received him at the wash basin near the cellar steps, and Caldwell across approximately 90 minutes of formal porch conversation conducted in English, presented to Rebecca a typewritten 3-page exclusive supply contract proposal, prepared on Buckeye Heritage Mercantile Company letterhead and dated April 20, 1973. The proposal offering the bulk purchase by Buckeye Heritage Mercantile of the full annual finished bar output of the Cherry Hill Lane Soap House at a wholesale rate of $8.50 per finished 6-ounce bar against the prevailing 1973 commercial bar soap retail price across the Akron retail market of approximately 42 cents per bar. The proposal further offering a 4-year exclusive supply commitment, running from the calendar year 1973 through the calendar year 1976, with annual escalation clauses tied to the United States Department of Labor Consumer Price Index for retail soap and cleansing products, and the proposed 1973 calendar year contract volume was set at 2,400 finished bars for a 1973 contract value of $20,400 against Rebecca's calendar year 1972. Farmstead operating income of $5,140, an immediate fourfold lift of the 1972 farmstead net, and Rebecca and Phineas Caldwell III, together with Rebecca's brother-in-law Amos Stoltzfus, countersigning as plain witness, signed the 4-year exclusive supply contract on the morning of Tuesday, April the 24th, 1973, at the Porch Wash Basin, the signed contract returning eastward with Caldwell that afternoon to the Akron office, and the first 1973 production shipment scheduled for monthly delivery, beginning June 1973. The Buckeye Heritage Mercantile announcement of the Caldwell-Stoltzfus exclusive supply contract appeared in the Akron Beacon Journal trade press column of Thursday, May 31st, 1973, in a single paragraph notice on page B11, under the heading Akron Heritage Goods Importer Signs Lancaster County Exclusive. And the brief Beacon Journal notice was forwarded by a Cleveland Plain Dealer Akron correspondent across the intervening 36 miles to the Public Square Cleveland newsroom desk of the Plain Dealer food and home life writer Genevieve Lockwood, then 38 years of age, a 1957 graduate of Oberlin College with a bachelor's degree in English literature and a Cleveland Plain Dealer feature writer since 1965. And Genevieve Lockwood, across the second week of June 1973, telephoned the Buckeye Heritage Mercantile Office at 119 South Main Street, Akron, Ohio, for the Caldwell account, and requested formal access to interview the Lancaster County soap maker for the Sunday Plain Dealer feature section. And Caldwell forwarded the formal access request through the Cherry Hill Lane gate by registered mail, and Rebecca consented to the interview by handwritten reply, mailed on June 11, 1973, and Genevieve Lockwood, on the morning of Thursday, June 14, 1973, drove the 326 miles from the Cleveland Plain Dealer Public Square office at 1801 Superior Avenue to the gravel turn-in at the foot of Cherry Hill Lane in a 1971 light blue Plymouth Fury station wagon, arriving at the Cherry Hill gate at approximately 5:10 in the late afternoon, and was received at the white clapboard farmhouse porch by Rebecca Stoltzfus and Lockwood across the 4 days of June 14th through June 17th, 1973, lodged at the Bird in Hand boarding house on the village square, and walked the 3 miles east to Cherry Hill Lane each morning at approximately 7:00 a.m. and remained at the soap house and the farmhouse and the spring house and the smokehouse and the orchard parcel and the old spot pasture across each full working day until approximately 6 p.m., taking handwritten notes at approximately 14 pages per day, and conducting reported speech interviews with Rebecca and with Amos Stoltzfus and with Lavina Byler, driven up from Strasburg, and with the Lidditz herbalist Mervyn Hostetler, and with the District 6 deacon Christian Byler. And Lockwood returned to Cleveland on the evening of Sunday, June 17th, and across the 5 weeks of late June and July 1973, drafted the 4,200-word Sunday feature article that appeared on the front page of the Cleveland Plain Dealer Sunday feature section on Sunday, July 22, 1973, under the headline, "The Cherry Hill Soap That Outlasted the Cartel." The Sunday feature article, picked up by the Knight Ridder newspaper chain wire service on the evening of Sunday, July 22nd, and reprinted across the 4 weeks of late July and August 1973 in the Detroit Free Press of July 29th, the Miami Herald of August 5th, the Akron Beacon Journal of August 8th, the Charlotte Observer of August 12th, the Philadelphia Inquirer of August 19th, and the further 14 Knight Ridder City dailies across the same 4-week span, the aggregate Knight Ridder reprint circulation across the 19 city dailies estimated at approximately 4.6 million Sunday readers, and the third major outside recognition arrived at the Cherry Hill Gate on the afternoon of Wednesday, October 17, 1973, when Olivia Penhallow, then 47 years of age, a 1947 graduate of Smith College and the executive director since 1962 of the American Heritage Goods Association of Concord, New Hampshire, drove the 412 miles from the Concord NH office at 142 North Main Street to the Cherry Hill Gate in a 1972 dark gray Mercedes-Benz 280 SE sedan and walked the 240 yards up the gravel drive to present a multi-year, multi-retailer supply contract proposal for distribution across the association's 38-member specialty heritage goods retail network. And Rebecca, after 15 days of consideration and consultation with Amos Stoltzfus and Lavina Byler and Phineas Caldwell III, accepted the American Heritage Goods Association contract by handwritten signed return on the morning of Saturday, November 3, 1973, with 3 explicit written conditions appended to the contract. First, that no finished soap bar would be sold under any brand name other than Cherry Hill Lane, Lancaster County Lard Soap. Second, that no fragrance agent or coloring agent would be added by any association member retailer to the finished bars. And third, that the contract would terminate immediately if any association member retailer were ever found to sell a synthetic phosphate detergent product under the Cherry Hill Lane brand or under any related brand. And the 1974 calendar year contract value across the 38-member association retail network was set at $46,800 against an annual production commitment of approximately 5,500 finished bars. Across the 6 months between the federal court ruling of August 19, 1973, and the late spring of 1974, each of the 4 Pennsylvania commercial soap and tallow cooperative executives and the Brunswick's general store proprietor, Edgar Brunswick, and the Penn State Extension specialist, Dr. Harlan Canepa, either visited or wrote formally to Cherry Hill Lane, and the documentary record of those 6 approaches is preserved through the Stoltzfus Farmstead correspondence file, together with the soap-making ledger entries Rebecca made on the porch wash basin in the immediate hours following each approach, and on the morning of Wednesday, January 9, 1974, the cooperative general manager, Walter Stiff, drove the 38 miles from the Cumberland Street Lebanon facility to the Cherry Hill Gate in a 1973 dark blue Buick Electra 2-door sedan and walked the 240 yards up the gravel drive carrying a typewritten, single-page revised wholesale contract offer prepared on the cooperative letterhead and dated January 7, 1974. The revised offer proposing the bulk wholesale purchase by the cooperative of the full annual hand-rendered lard output of the Cherry Hill Lane farmstead at a revised rate of $1.94 per pound of finished lard, a 12-fold increase over the April 7, 1970 offer of 16 cents per pound, and Rebecca received the typewritten sheet at the wash basin and read the single page in silence across approximately 2 minutes, and returned the folded sheet across the porch railing with the quietly spoken declination that the Laird was wholly committed to the Buckeye Heritage Mercantile and American Heritage Goods Association supply contracts and would not be sold separately at any wholesale price the cooperative could offer. And on the morning of Wednesday, March 6, 1974, the Brunswick's general store proprietor, Edgar Brunswick, mailed from his Queen Street, Lancaster city shop a typewritten retail stocking inquiry letter to the Cherry Hill Lane farmhouse requesting consignment stocking of the finished bars at the Queen Street shop, and Rebecca, by handwritten reply, mailed on March 12, 1974, declined the inquiry on the ground of exclusivity to the prior contracted accounts. And on the afternoon of Thursday, April 11, 1974, the Penn State Home Economics Extension Specialist, Dr. Harlan Nepper, mailed from the Lancaster County Cooperative Extension Service office on East King Street a typewritten formal letter to the Cherry Hill Lane farmhouse retracting the 1971 non-compliant Farmstead Annual Report Notation and entering into the Lancaster County Cooperative Extension Service 1974 Annual Report a corresponding formal correction of the prior 1971 notation. And across the 4 weeks of November 1974, the Pennsylvania Commercial Soap and Tallow Cooperative entered formal receivership before the Lebanon County Court of Common Pleas under docket number 74-RC-118, with aggregate liabilities of approximately $13.4 million against assets of approximately $9.2 million. The receivership proceedings completed on Thursday, February 6, 1975, with the formal dissolution of the Cooperative Association. Walter Stiff retired from the cooperative effective February 28, 1975, at the age of 65. His retirement notice appearing in the Lebanon Daily News of March 1, 1975, page B4. And the Cumberland Street facility was sold in late August 1975 to a small Wisconsin natural soap startup operating under the name Wisconsin Hand-Rendered Soap and Tallow Company of Sheboygan, Wisconsin. The sale closing on Friday, August 22, 1975, at a cash sale price of approximately $840,000 against the cooperative's December 1972 audited fixed asset value of approximately $3.6 million. The community acknowledgement phase of the Cherry Hill Lane Chronicle proceeded across the calendar years 1973 and 1974 and 1975 through the formal channels of the Pennsylvania Heritage Press and the District 6 Old Order Amish Church Ledger and the Lancaster City Council Retroactive Commendation Record and the Pennsylvania Heritage Quarterly Editorial Office at the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission at 3rd and North Streets in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, published in the spring 1974 issue of the Quarterly under Volume 1, Number 2, a quarter-page item on page 31 titled The Cherry Hill Soap House, under the byline of the Quarterly Assistant Editor Margaret Halford documenting the soap house operation. The spring 1974 item incorporating 6 paragraphs of Genevieve Lockwood's July 1973 plain dealer feature material under formal reprint license, and a single 4x6 black and white photograph of the soap house exterior taken by the quarterly staff photographer Theodore Brennan on the afternoon of Saturday, January 26, 1974. The Lancaster County Agricultural Press writer Mariela Castellano published in the Philadelphia Inquirer Sunday Magazine of Sunday, December 9, 1973, a 2,600-word follow-up feature titled Lancaster County Soap and the Lake Erie Reckoning on pages 14 through 17 of the Sunday Magazine, extending the Lockwood Plain Dealer feature with additional ledger account documentation of the calendar years 1971 through 1973, and incorporating 5 reported speech interview passages with Rebecca, and with Amos Stoltzfus, and with Lavina Byler, and with the District 6 Deacon Christian Byler, and with the Lidditz herbalist Mervyn Hostetler. The District 6 Old Order Amish Church Ledger, maintained by the Deacon Christian Byler, at the Old Order Amish District Meeting House on the south side of Stumptown Road, 3/4 of a mile northwest of Bird in Hand, recorded under the dated entry of Sunday, December 30th, 1973. A brief 2-sentence acknowledgment of the soap house operation as a faithful continuation of the matrilineal Stoltzfus and Byler heritage, and a quiet contribution to the temporal sustenance of the District 6 widow households, then totaling 38 surviving widows of the district, and the Lancaster City Council across the regular meeting of Tuesday, April 8th, 1975, entered into the formal minutes of the council under the consent agenda item number 75-14, a retroactive commendation of the Cherry Hill Lane Farmstead Soap House operation for the contribution to the Lancaster County heritage economy across the calendar years 1969 through 1974. The retroactive commendation drafted by the council member from the 6th Ward, Margaret O'Brien, and seconded by the council member from the 4th Ward, Theodore Fitzpatrick, and carrying by unanimous vote of the 7 council members present at the April 8th meeting, the formal commendation certificate prepared on the Lancaster City Council letterhead and signed by the City Council President Henry Mueller on April 11th, 1975, and mailed to the Cherry Hill Lane Farmhouse address by registered mail on Saturday, April 12th, 1975, and received by Rebecca on the porch wash basin on Monday, April 14th, 1975, and entered into the Stoltzfus Farmstead Heritage File under the formal correspondence index for the calendar year 1975. The chronicle closes where chronicles of the matrilineal craft of the plain settlements must always close, in the recovered private flashback of the female generation that preserved the recipe before the chronicler arrived to record it, and across the autumn afternoon of an undated October day in the calendar year 1898, in the small fieldstone soap house, standing 14 feet east of the white clapboard kitchen door of a 38-acre old order Amish farmstead on the eastern outskirts of the village of Lidditz in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Barbara Byler, then 45 years of age, an old order Amish woman with dark chestnut hair center-parted and gathered into a low, neat bun beneath a white, heart-shaped Lancaster-style prayer cap, weather-worn, pale, freckled skin, calm, composed, unsmiling mouth, sturdy build, wearing a plain, long-sleeved, solid, deep slate-gray dress with a high collar over a full-coverage matching deep slate-gray apron pinned at the shoulders with straight pins, thick black wool stockings, plain black leather lace-up boots, stands at her own worn pine rendering bench outside the eastern wall of a small 1881 fieldstone soap house in autumn afternoon light, slowly ladling rendered lard from a 22-gallon copper kettle suspended above a low-banked wood fire, the copper kettle hand-forged by the Lidditz blacksmith Eli Hostetler in the spring of 1879. The worn pine rendering bench cut and joined by Barbara Byler's husband, Jacob Byler, in the autumn of 1881 from a Lidditz red oak log felled the prior winter, the wood fire banked low with the Pennsylvania anthracite coal and split hickory characteristic of the Lancaster County 1898 farmstead cook fires. The ladle in Barbara Byler's right hand, a hand-wrought iron rendering ladle handed down to her by her own grandmother Anna Schmucker of Sugar Creek, Tuscarawas County, Ohio, in the autumn of 1873. And beside her, on the worn pine rendering bench, rests a small handwritten Pennsylvania German recipe note in faded ink on a folded sheet of unlined cream paper, recording, in Pennsylvania German, the precise proportions of the lard, tallow, lye, rosewater, lavender cure she had learned at age 12 from her grandmother Anna Schmucker in the autumn of 1865 in the small fieldstone soap house of Anna Schmucker's farmstead on the southern outskirts of the village of Sugar Creek in Tuscarawas County, Ohio. The recipe note proportions specifying 14 ounces of hand-rendered lard, 3 ounces of hand-rendered tallow, 5.6 fluid ounces of ash lye solution at the egg float middle notch working strength, 1.4 ounces of distilled rosewater, 0.6 ounces of dried lavender, and a single piece of dried orris root for fixative. The proportions identical in every fluid and dry ounce to the proportions Rebecca Stoltzfus would render in her own copper kettle 71 years later, 3 miles east of Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania, in the autumn of 1969. And the recipe Anna Schmucker had carried into her own Sugar Creek kitchen in the autumn of 1822 at the age of 9 from the kitchen of her grandmother, Katharina van Housen of Schaffhausen, Switzerland, on the Upper Rhine. The 4 matrilineal layers, Katharina van Housen of Schaffhausen, Switzerland, to Anna Schmucker of Sugar Creek, Ohio, to Barbara Byler of Lidditz, Pennsylvania, to Lavina Byler of Strasburg, Pennsylvania, reaching across 147 years from a Schaffhausen kitchen on the Upper Rhine in 1822 to a Cherry Hill Lane fieldstone soap house outside Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania. In 1969, the recipe carried unbroken across 4 generations of grandmother to granddaughter instruction in the quiet women's rooms of the Plain settlements. The recipe surviving the 1947 introduction of Tide and the 1955 phosphate adoption of the regional commercial soap cooperatives and the 1962 Home Economics Extension brochures and the 1969 Brunswick dismissal and the 1970 Cumberland Street wholesale offer and the 1971 Knepper visit and surfacing again in the public record between the August 1973 federal court ruling and the November 1973 American Heritage Goods Association contract, the recipe outlasting the cartel that had tried to absorb it and the regulator that had tried to retire it and the merchant who had tried to dismiss it, and the chronicle closes where it began, at the worn pine rendering bench inside a small fieldstone soap house on a quiet hillside in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, with a plain widow ladling pale clarified lard from a 22-gallon copper kettle through the cool 56-degree air toward the cedar molds along the eastern wall. If you have ever raised an animal everybody told you was the wrong one for your county, leave a comment below telling us what it was. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe and ring the bell. There is one of these stories in every county in America. We are working through them one harvest at a time.